everybody, Drew here again. Today is going to be the long-awaited part 2 of my music theory in action, house music. I'm going to keep this one pretty short. Co-producer, a friend of mine, suggested I keep some of these videos shorter so that those of you with shorter attention spans can follow. So I'm going to try to just show you sidechaining default instruments in Logic with default plugins in Logic. If you're not familiar with the concept of sidechaining, when you hear this term in electronic music, most often it's referring to sidechain compression. In other words, compression that is then linked to some sort of source information. The most common one is going to be sidechaining a bass to a kick drum, which is what I'm going to show you today. What that does is it will compress or squeeze the bass every time that we trigger that to happen, and we're going to trigger it to the kick. And the idea with this is that every time the kick hits, the actual bass is going to squeeze slightly. It's going to duck in volume, and that's going to be basically allow the kick to cut through the mix more. In many ways, I think this is one of the one of the technical reasons for the boom in electronic music and dance music. When we are able to do sidechaining in production, we allow ourselves to ultimately make the low end and the mix hit harder. And those of you that have been to your fair share of dance music shows, you'll know that sonically that music hits us like few other genres. And I don't mean that in terms of emotionally hitting us through its compositional prowess, uniqueness. I mean hitting us by the sonic quality, the bigness of the sound, the amount of low end, the amount of punch, all of those things. All right, so without further ado, let's do that. So this is the track that I have going. I made this in part 1. If you haven't seen it, you can find a link on my channel. I'm going to play it just from shortly before the drums drop in, and let's hear what we've got. Alright, so let's talk about sidechaining. You may have seen me mute this extra layer of drums. I accidentally had that in. This is going to be the first step that we're going to take to creating a trigger. Alright, so if you're working from an audio-based kick in Logic, creating a trigger is actually a little bit easier. If we're working from the default drum machine instruments, you may have noticed this sort of drop-down menu. These are not actual individual MIDI instruments, but it's a group, it's a stack of MIDI controlled instruments. So unfortunately for us in Logic, we don't have the instant bounce in place option. So what we can do is duplicate. So let me go back a step and show you what I did here. We're going to grab our Epic Electro. I'll name this drums just so you can see what I'm doing here. We're going to duplicate our drum channel. We're going to drag all of our MIDI down. Then what we're going to do is zoom out. This bottom layer is our kick drum. These other symbols are symbols. These other dots are our actual cymbals, and then the snare. I'm going to get rid of those. This is why we made a duplicate. Alright, then I'm going to label this drum trigger. Alright, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to solo this track. I am going to bounce it as a wave. It's an extra step. Let's call this our drum trigger. Alright, doing this from the beginning of the song, so it's going to be easier to plug in. Then I'm going to go to my Finder window, my wonderfully organized stuff. Go to the bounce folder where that trigger is going to be. I'm going to drag this audio clip in right to the beginning. All right. Now we notice that we have audio. Great. Drum trigger. All right. So I can now mute this other trigger. All right. So if you were working from an audio like a sample-based kick, this is going to be a step further or faster because you're already going to have audio version. Logic likes audio for sidechaining. It's a lot. It's just what it prefers. All right. So now, if you were from an audio-based kick, all you do is bounce in place or duplicate the track and join them. Now, first step is I'm going to turn off my output. What this does is it makes it so we're not actually going to hear the trigger. We didn't duplicate this to duplicate our drum sound, but rather we're going to use this information to do something in the track. You may be thinking, oh, well, if I already have a kick in there, couldn't I just sidechain it to the kick? Well, one, for the reason of the difficulty of sidechaining actual MIDI and Logic, it prevents us from doing that. But in addition to that, even if it was an audio-based kick, it's better to create a trigger than to actually sidechain to the kick. It's important that the trigger is the kick so that the transients are consistent. But the cool thing about this, and this is where our next step comes in, is we can actually shape what part of the kick sound does this trigger respond to. Now I like doing a cut of everything below 500 hertz. All right, I do this for all my triggers. Now what that's going to do is it's going to get rid of all the subs, all the frequencies that are going to hang out for longer, and it's going to give us a cleaner signal of right when the drum hits. All right, then we're going to go into our subby bass. We're going to add a new compressor. I'd already done that, but you're going to find that in Dynamics, Compressor. Cool. All right. Now, this is the kind of confusing thing. This compressor is on the bass. It's going to actually alter the sound of the bass, but it's going to listen to the drum trigger we had created. All right, so in the upper right-hand corner on the sidechain drop-down menu, you're going to choose the trigger that you created. All right. Then we get a few different views. This Logic compressor is super cool and customizable. So there are all sorts of different ways that we can actually even change the way that the sidechain is detecting. We can alter what frequency it picks up. So that actually sort of does like what the EQ cut that I suggested doing on the trigger. Now I typically sidechain with the R compressor from Waves. In these tutorial videos, I'm going to stick with default stuff. So I still like to use that trigger method. Now when we, let's go ahead and create a loop when the bass actually gets going. And let's play this. Now what we should notice is that this needle is going to move with the kick. So on a 4 on the floor type movement. Let's check it out. Oh, before we do this, Logic's default when you open it up gives an auto gain of -12 dB. What that does is it's going to change the output of the actual track to try to mitigate the volume reduction that's going to happen in the moments when it's compressing. I like to keep that off. We can always add makeup gain back in, or finally the actual output gain. All right, let's watch the needle move. Oh. It's not moving. Why is that? Well, that's because my threshold is not low enough. None of the bass sounds were loud enough to actually trigger. All right. Now, as we do this, you should sort of hear the sidechaining effect come to life. Now, most people struggle to hear what compression is doing. I think sidechain compression is a little bit easier to hear. However, when we're actually listening to the drums and the bass, we're probably going to notice it more in the difference in the way the kick actually sounds rather than the bass, because the kick is there to fill in the sound. If I solo out our bass instrument, you're going to notice the ducting. I'm going to actually make this a little bit exaggerated so you can really hear it. probably hear it going up and down. So that's an excessive sidechain. All right. I'll sort of do an intro to compressors here. I'm going to talk a lot about this. This is a technology or an area of audio that I feel like is probably has the deepest both application and learning curve. Compression, as you can notice from this top menu in Logic, we have lots of different types of compression. Luckily, the same controls show up in a lot of these different compressors, so you're going to see these a lot, so that's good. Threshold, you could think of like the threshold of a door. It's where one room ends and another room starts. So where the actual threshold is essentially going to be everything above negative 40 dB for this setup is triggering compression. So that means everything above that volume is going to be compressed. Ratio, like it sounds, this is basically a way of saying how much compression. All right, so where does the compression happen? How much? 1 to 1. Some of my people I'll hear ask, why am I not hearing compression? My compressor's on, I see the needle moving. The reason for that is going to be we're at a 1 to 1. If you multiply 30 by 1, it's still 30, so nothing's happening. As we go up, the amount of change is increasing. All right, talked about this before. This is makeup gain. Not all compressors have this, but what this does is it actually adds volume back in to mitigate the reduction in volume that happens from compressing the frequencies that trigger past our threshold marking. Knee, this refers to the actual compression behavior in the moment that it is being compressed. So at this point at negative 40 dB, essentially a hard knee or a soft knee is going to basically be like a blend of the compression. A hard knee means we go from an uncompressed signal directly to the ratio. A soft knee means in that moment it takes slightly further to get there. Finally, attack. This is attack and release are probably some of the more important things to understand for sidechain compression. So attack is when does the compressor come on? Now, since we are essentially sidechaining so that the punch and the smack of the kick comes through the bass, I'm going to have our attack pretty quick, perhaps even instant. Release, this is going to be kind of cool to control the slap back of the compression. If we want our sidechain to be noticeable, we could have a high release. You're going to hear the bass go breathe like woo, woo. You're going to notice when the compression is being released. Let's hear that. Cool, we're up and running. Let's hear it with our actual drums. Now, so that you can notice the difference, let's hear it without our sidechaining. Here's with. Here's without. With. If you didn't notice that, I encourage you to try to replicate these steps in your own session and try to listen really closely. Again, you'll notice it more if you're soloing the actual bass as opposed to hearing the drum fill that sound in. You should notice that, again, the kick sounds like it's clearer. In fact, the whole low end feels clearer because there's not any muddiness created from these signals overlapping in a moment. Cool, let's now hear the whole track in context with our triggering. So it was a little bit longer than I was shooting for, at like 16 minutes, hoping for 10. I will continue to work on giving you some both in-depth, longer videos for those of you with the attention span, and then for those of you just looking to jump in and learn a quick technique, I will try to make some short ones. So there's sidechain compression in the context of an original house track. I'm thinking some of the next techniques I'll cover are creating vocal effects, manipulating vocals in sort of an effect manner, and let's see, for house music I think it could be cool to talk about creating some other sound effects. I think it could be cool to talk about building a custom bass sound so we're not using the default subby bass. But yeah, feel free to shoot me an email down below. If you haven't checked out the music theory textbook, I'm would be grateful if you do. No pressure there. If you have any ideas for topics, I'd love to hear from you. All right, till next time, signing out.